Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us, Future Work Scotland, for our finale of 2023. Yeah, got to the end of the year. Amazing. How did that happen? Flew by. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sathpal Singh, because Sath. I'm the organiser of Future Work Scotland and your lead host for this session. I'm joined by Donald and Paula, part of the organising team at Future Work Scotland. And we're delighted to have you all here. If this is your first time, very well welcome to you. If you've been with us before, many of you have, recognise a lot of familiar faces, and welcome back. This is the last one of the year, so we're thrilled to have such a special session in store for you. Just the usual formalities. We have a very simple code of conduct. Just ask that everybody's respectful to one another and everyone have a really good experience. So do please support us with that. I'm going to hand over to our speaker in a second. Jim's going to do a short sort of talk, about 30 minutes or so. So we're going to have bags of time, folks, for questions this evening. So we'd like to turn that into a little bit of a Ask Jim Anything, within reason, obviously. We're thrilled to have him here. Want to tap into his wealth of experience. So please do make the most of the opportunity. We encourage you to do so. And we'll do any sort of announcements and things at the end. Just to wrap up, so I'm absolutely thrilled and honoured to welcome Jim Highsmith to Future Work Scotland to help us close out what has been another fantastic year for our group. And we've really enjoyed all of the sessions, but it's wonderful to have someone like Jim here. If you followed the history of Agile, you know, Jim will need no introduction. He was one of the original 17 who co-authored the manifesto. Yes, absolutely. So if you've got any questions about what really went on there or what it was about, Jim's your man, because he was there. So I think that's what it's all about. Jim's going to talk a little bit about the history. Jim has nearly 60 years of industry experience, so I'm honoured that we're hosting him this evening, and do please tap into his wealth of knowledge and experience. He's done a range of things in his illustrious career, and he was one of the founding members of Agile Alliance, as you probably well know. He's done a whole raft of other things you can read about in the bio and in the event listing. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jim. I'm looking forward to learning lots of stuff from his vast experience. Jim, welcome to Future Work Scotland.
Thanks, Seth. Let me get my screen up here. Thanks for that introduction. You know, it's been 60 years, but that means I started when I was 5 years old, so I'm not really that old yet. So this first slide, I want to talk about Agile to Agility today, and one of the things that I liked about your name is the future of work. So I want to talk a little bit about the future of work, but I also want to go back into sort of the history of work in order to get some perspective. So on the screen up there, you'll see on the right-hand side is the Snowbird Resort in Utah, where the Agile Manifesto was sold. And then to the left a little bit is my favorite storyteller, Jeremy Waite, who I've learned a lot about storytelling from. And then the book that I wrote about 6 months ago came out, Wild West to Agile, which is really a kind of a 60-year history of the software development movement, kind of through some of the stuff that I have done, some of my stories. So just to kind of give you some perspective, when I started working, I was an electrical engineer, and we were designing circuits with transistors that are about the end, big as the end of a eraser on a pencil. And now you get 5 billion transistors in a small area. And so it really has changed quite a bit. If you could have had it in 1970, but you couldn't actually buy a gigabyte of RAM, it would have cost $734 million. Today it would cost 10. So that's kind of the explosion in technology. And by the way, the image up there for Wikipedia, that's core memory. That's when we used to have to hand put wires through toroid cores. And so it was a very manual process. And so it was very, very expensive to get core memory back in those days. People ask sometimes about the idiots that made a 2-digit year field back in the 70s, but we did it because of the cost of space and processing power. So this is sort of the advances in technology and how it impacted software development over the years. So up in the upper left-hand corner was how we did it in 1970. We basically punched cards, fed them into the computer. It would go on for hours, and it would kind of get a printout out. And basically that was it. Because of all the computers were so slow, and the amount of work you wanted it to do was so big, it would take 12 to 24 hours. So it'd be like sitting there developing software as if you're a developer and hitting the enter button and having it respond 12 hours later. It would slow you down a little bit in terms of your effectiveness and your productivity. Below that is what we did in the 1980s. So you had a terminal, that it was green screened, and it was character based. So all you had was characters. And the design ethic at that time was fill screens with as much data as you possibly can, even though it looks crappy. Because there was no such thing as GUI interfaces, and it was still, you're restricted by the technology. In the upper right-hand corner was sort of the 90s, where you had beginning to have Windows and Mac kind of screens. You had a mouse, which you didn't have before, and you had internet connection. And you'll notice the internet connection there is an acoustic coupler with the phone. And anybody that went through that era knows that when you went to hotels and tried to hook into the internet, it was really problematic as to how long it would take you to get there. And then the bottom right is what we've got today, which in your living rooms, you know, you have all these devices. You have TVs, and you have remote, you have laptops, and you have iPads, and you have iPhones, and you have virtual reality. So it has changed quite a bit over those 60 years. And this is sort of the evolution of software engineering tools. In the 1970s, we had one tool, that was a compiler. And when you had an error and the program bombed out, you got a core dump of the entirety of core memory in hexadecimal, and you had to go in and debug that. And it was time consuming. And you can kind of see how things went. The 90s were kind of interesting when you had case tools, which are computer-aided software engineering tools. And those were thought at the time that eventually they would take over and eliminate programming jobs. It didn't happen. They enhanced some of the development, but they didn't replace programmers. And then you'll see .NET and then Azure, and there also, I just used some of the Microsoft stuff. There's plenty of other vendors out there. First of all, there was internet and GUI. Those kinds of technologies came in, and then cloud and big data, and now AI. So you can see the sort of evolution of case tools, of engineering tools, mirrored the times and the technology that was available. So one of the reasons I wrote the book, Wild West to Agile, was because I wanted to give people a sense of history and how it impacted what we do today. And as I got to writing the last chapter, I began to think, you know, I was going to predict some stuff for the future, but I thought, no, history's role does not help us predict the future, but to prepare it for us. So that's what I want to talk about today, is preparing for the future. So over on the right, you'll see technology in about 1935 to 1940, a little early 40s. That's a technology back then. And basically, when you got on the telephone and you told the operator the number, and the operator would plug into a wire into a particular hole, and then contact another switchboard operator at the other end, and you would take a few minutes and you'd make this connection. It was very labor intensive, and in 1940, it employed about 400,000 people to do these switchboard operators. And quickly, once technology took over, all of these people were out of jobs in fairly quick order. So one of the things about technology advances is it always creates new jobs, and it also always eliminates other jobs. And what you hope is that it doesn't eliminate yours, but what you want to do is prepare for it so that it doesn't. Another thing that I've learned from that 60 years is based on what Peter Drucker had to say. And Peter Drucker was sort of the father of modern management. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. In other words, we'll talk about culture here in a little bit, about the culture, the agile culture. And then, as we all know, the increasing turbulence and speed of our era, from everything from the pandemic to the economic situation, to the political situation, to the technology situation. With the advent of AI and quantum computing to come, it's going to cause a lot more turbulence and speed. So if we want to look at culture, and as Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, this was the Agile Manifesto. And as you know, it had 4 values and then 12 principles. But it really was all about 2 things at the core. It was about performance and people. It was about building methods and methodologies and mindsets so that we had higher performance, better software, more attuned to the user and the customer. And then also was people, having a more equitable place and fun place to work. And so the Agile Manifesto was all about really 4 values. One, and it's interesting to me and kind of ironic that the first principle or first value is individuals and interactions. In other words, collaboration among individuals and interactions. And so the key value that a bunch of techies came up with was an interpersonal value. So I think that's a little bit ironic. You want to produce good products. You want to produce good engineered products for the customer. You want to be able to explore. One of the phrases I used is that the old style of development was plan do. You planned it out in detail, and then you did it. The new style or agile style of development is envision, explore. You envision where you want to go and you explore into that vision. And so that was one of the values here, is being able to do a plan, but vary from the plan as reality kind of took over. So these were the core values of Agile in the beginning. Let me just point out something here. In 2001, when the manifesto was written, the Agile community was the size of that dot. It was very, very small. There were not many others. Now, the Agile community is this huge number of people that goes all over the world. And so what worked for a small group in 2001 is not going to be what works for the Agile community in 2003. And you'll notice also that there's always a group that are questioning the Agile, and whether it's, there's a lot of noise on some of the social media about Agile is dead, it's past its prime, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't believe that, but I think we need to do something about some of the negativity. So several of us got together at the Agile conference in Orlando in October and started on this kind of initiative called Back to Basics, Forward to the Future, which basically says, let's take what's good and useful out of the manifesto and out of some of the core values, clarifying them if it needs to be, and then extend it for the future. So if AI is going to be really important in the future, maybe there's a methodology or a set of methods that will enhance AI. And so maybe you have an Agile AI group, maybe you have an Agile project management group that take those basic values and extend them into these different areas. And so this kind of Agile mentality or the Agile mindset is appropriate for both individuals or enterprises. I'm going to talk about both as we go through the next set of slides. And so what do you learn? What do you need to learn as an individual or as an organization? And that means you got to have some way of sensing what the marketplace has out there. How many of you get lost in the internet and all the information that's kind of flowing out of it and all the stuff that you look at today? I mean, look at how many podcasts there are. Back when we just got started, there were 3 or 4 books on Agile. Now there's the 100 best Scrum books. And so there are a lot of people write about AI today. And so you have to have a sensing mechanism out there to say, what do I need to learn? And then you need to go through the process of learning it. And again, this is for an organization or an individual, and then adapting to that. So there's this looping cycle that you go through time after time after time, which is kind of the essence of Agile, whether you're doing software development or whether you're doing career development. I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about these three things: methods, methodology, and mindset. We talk about an Agile mindset. We talk about Agile methodologies. We get confused, I think, sometimes in thinking Agile is a methodology. It's not. Scrum is a methodology. SAFe is a methodology. Extreme programming is a methodology. So let me just define these for you a little bit. A method is something that or a practice that you use. So refactoring might be a method. Retrospective might be a method. Sprint planning might be a method. So it's a way of doing work. A methodology is an accumulation of methods that apply across some part of the life cycle. So if you have XP, for example, it really is focused on programming and development, testing and delivering, and not so much on the front end in terms of product management. So it is basically a delivery methodology, whereas someone else might come up with a product management methodology. So you can even string methodologies together. Mindset is what you believe about the world in general and how you think the world works. There's a book out that's been very, very popular called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success by Carol Dweck. And she talks about two basic fundamental mindsets: a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And basically it has to do with how amenable to change those two mindsets are. So one of the problems you get with some implementations of methodology is you run up against Agile people at the team level who have a growth mentality, and then you run into a management up above that has a fixed mentality. And I'm sure many of you have run into those kinds of issues before, and they'll continue to be issues until we are able to incorporate these Agile mindset into higher levels of management. In the beginning, I even had some articles that I wrote that showed a mountain, and it showed a climber going up the mountain and talked about how you go up, how you traverse to get to a peak, to get to a goal. And then when you get to that goal, the sun comes out and everything's shiny. And one of the things that I've come to believe is that Agile is not a goal to be achieved. So that really is not what we're looking for. We're looking for agility as a journey that never ends. And whether you're doing, and however you break down agility, but let's say you start out and you have this peak to climb, which gives team agility, or which provides team agility. So you get to the top, and then actually have to go down again to get to the next one. So it's an up and down process, because you're trying to change different parts of the organization. So maybe for portfolio agility, you also have to change middle management's mindset. And maybe for strategic agility, you have to change the mindset of the people in charge at the C-suite. And so at the team agility level, you've got to change the mindset of the team and the people who are involved closely with the teams. So agility is a journey that never ends. It's really a lifelong journey of how you think about learning. So let's take a look at AI. Is it scary or not? Every new technology has critics. President Benjamin Harrison and his wife were afraid to turn on the light switches in the White House because it was this advanced technology called electricity, and they were afraid of it. And so there are things to be concerned about in terms of AI, but there are also things that we should take and use. One of the things we ought to think about when we're talking about AI and some of these other advanced technologies is there's change and then there's change. So let's just talk about 3 levels of change. A turning point would be something that you would encounter maybe on a project or a product development effort, where you would have a slight to medium deviation from your plan. A revolutionary, and the preparation for that is to prepare your knowledge and experience. Revolutionary would be a bigger kind of change. So, for example, the internet coming in would be a revolutionary change. And the strategy for that is to really prepare. And then you have a cataclysmic change. And the strategy for that is to get lucky. So let me give you an example. When the dinosaurs disappeared 65 million years ago, it was caused by a cataclysmic meteorite that struck in Mexico and scattered ash throughout the air, throughout the world, which changed the climate. It's sort of interesting that we're in a climate change period now. Back then, it cooled off the climate as opposed to heating up the climate. It's what we're doing. Climate is what we're doing now. And so the dinosaurs died off. And because the mammals had more heat regulation capability, mammals flourished. It was completely accidental. So we were just lucky as mammals. So what kind is AI going to be a cataclysmic change, or is it going to be a revolutionary change? And so what I'm going to talk about is I think it's going to be a revolutionary change. I think there's some other cataclysmic events that are more probable than AI being a cataclysmic event. One of the things that I'm noticing as I talk to people around the world is I think that one of the things that's happened to the Agile movement is that the distribution of work has gotten out of whack, and the industry is undergoing a realignment. So if you break down the practices in Agile to engineering practices, collaboration practices, and management practices, I think we're spending a little bit too much time and energy in the collaboration area and not enough on the engineering area. And I think if you dig down into companies recently who have been in the news about getting rid of Agile, they're not getting rid of Agile. They're realigning what they're doing. And one of the things that they're doing is taking a really hard look at things like coaches and the first level Scrum Masters and taking a look at their talents and abilities. And you'll notice that that's the level that tends to be let go these days. It's not the engineering. So I think there's some realignment going on there that you need to prepare for. And part of that preparation, and I was giving this presentation to a group a couple of months ago, and I said, everyone must have technical skills. The 3 best CIOs that I know have more technical skills than a lot of people that I know. They have incredible technical skills at a CIO level. And so at a project management or a Scrum Master or a product lead owner level, you've got to also have technical skills. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to take a look at. If you're in those kind of categories, sort of the one level up from the team. You take that adaptive life cycle and use it for both your own career and your business in terms of capability development. And we're going to have to learn to do it faster. So, for example, I was just looking up the other day, and I used one of the AI tools to rapidly tell me what a particular job entailed and where I might go for training and what kind of training did I need. So you can actually use AI as part of the tools that you use to develop your own career path. Although, as I'm going to tell you in just a minute, you don't have a career path anymore. You have an obstacle course. There is so much going on that it's hard to determine where to go. So, for example, you've heard about T kinds of people who have broad skills in one area and deep skills in another area. What you're going to have in the future is you're going to have broad skills, and then you're going to have a number of deep skills and a number of shallower skills, and they're going to change a lot over time. And so what you have to do is you have to make sure that you understand what you need to gain knowledge on, the sensing mechanism, and then figure out how to do it faster. And AI can be of help in both of those things so that you can look at it as a tool to be used, not something that's going to be going to take your jobs away. In terms of sensing, and I think that's one of the hardest things to do with so much going on, what are the important things to look at and what are the not so important things to look at? Every 6 months, ThoughtWorks creates a tech radar. And you'll see in here that have different levels, like adopt this technology, trial this technology, assess this technology, hold this technology. And you see what you see here is a quarter of the tech radar. And if you want to look at the full thing, you go to ThoughtWorks website. But this is the kind of thing that you need to be doing for yourselves, is looking at all of these things. And on this radar, these things change every 6 months to quite a different extent. So what they do is they sit down with 10 or 12 technology experts from all over the world, and they come up with this technology radar every 6 months. And you need to find somebody who is doing that to kind of help you sense what's going on in the world in terms of technology. So I think the Agile community is left with, I'll say, these 4 critical issues. One is, I think there's a big misunderstanding of the 3 M's: methods, methodology, and mindset. I think where most people get in trouble is they implement methodologies, but they don't adopt the right mindset, a continuous learning mindset. And if you think about it, I think there are a lot of companies that do what I call prescriptive agility. You shouldn't have that adjective associated with Agile, but some people approach it in a, here are the 6 practices that you've got to use, and you got to use them like this all the time, and you can't deviate from these practices. And yet that's completely anti-Agile, because Agile is really adaptive agility, which means you adapt the process as you go along, as you learn more, as you encounter new technology and new ideas. So it's a continuous learning process. And I think part of it is we get to the methodology arena and we don't get to the mindset arena. One of the things I've noticed over 60 years of my career is I have seen every methodology, from waterfall to Scrum to Crystal to all the others. I've seen every single one of them fail, and I've seen every single one of them succeed. And so a lot of it is how you implement methodologies as opposed to the particular methodology. Now, there are definitely some that are better for some things than others. So, for example, when you have high uncertainty, it's better to use an Agile-like approach, but you've got to have the people that have an Agile mindset. I think the distribution of roles is out of whack. And I think we're seeing companies that are cutting back, and some of them are cutting Agile staffs because they don't want to do Agile anymore. But I think more of them are adjusting their distribution rather than cutting out staff. And agility is a journey, not a destination. And so you don't ever get there. You've got some intermediate peaks that you climb, maybe for team agility, and then you go on to the next. But you never. It's like, when do you stop learning in our environment? You never stop learning. A good friend of mine who's a database guru, I was talking to him not long ago. He's in his mid-50s, and he's now going back to school to get a major in AI. So it never stopped. And then I think one of the things that's going to happen is that AI is going to magnify the impact on enterprises and individuals that ignore one to three. So AI is going to magnify the impact because it's so powerful and can help be so productive. So I'm going to end this with a challenge to the group. How are you contributing to the growth and vitality of our industry? And if you want a way to think about it, join the Reimagine Agile movement. Back to basics, forward to the future. Think about your implementation of Agile and what you like about it, what you think should be carried forward. What do you think is the good parts of that? And where do you think some of the problems or issues with Agile is? And then how are you going to fix those and go forward in the future? And there's a small group that's working on this, and you'll be hearing more about it in the future, and I'll talk more about it if anybody wants to. And I have to put in a plug. I just found this out yesterday, that Gartner just released their 2024 reading guide for software engineers and architects, and my book was one of 5 Agile books recommended. So I have to put in that plug. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Seth.
fantastic, Jim. We did see that. I saw that on LinkedIn, so that was fantastic to see your book being recognised. And I forgot to plug it for you at the start, so I do have my copy here. Donald's got his copy, so well worth the read. I'm still working through it, but it has lots of great insight. Donald's holding up, even a bit of background. Thanks, Jim. That was fantastic. Great scene setter for the Q&A. I did have a couple in the chat, so I'll start with those, and then we'll open it up to the group. You talked earlier about everybody needing to have more technical skills and that being really, really important. What sort of technical skills would you say were most crucial?
I'm not sure that I can recommend specific technical skills unless you had a particular job that you were doing or job that you were looking to do. You know, I don't think every Scrum Master, for example, needs to know how to code, but they do need to have some technical knowledge about what a programmer's job really is all about, and some of the tools that they use, and more than just the management or collaborative practices around Scrum. Those are really important, but one of the things that Scrum hasn't had from the beginning is really a set of technical practices. And so what they've done is a lot of people, like Mike Cohn in particular, has married XP practices with Scrum practices. So Mike came out of the XP movement. And so a lot of people have done that and then expanded on those technical practices. But now, for example, the technical practices associated with AI are going to be important. I was looking through some AI training classes not long ago, and I noticed that they required programming language, that you knew the programming language of AI in order to take these workshops. So I think, you know, you need to look at what you're doing, what the appropriate technology is for that. So for example, if your team is using Azure, do you know anything about Azure? You know, do you know what it encompasses and what it doesn't encompass, and how it helps people and how it doesn't help people? So those are the kinds of things that I think people need to know from a technology standpoint.
Great, no, that's great advice, and yeah, absolutely. I guess it'll be contextual. Depends what sort of domain you're in and what you're trying to do. There's a great question here from Erin, and I'm really interested to see where you can answer this. If you and your co-authors of the Agile Manifesto went up the mountain to ski again, what would you talk about?
Well, I'm to the age that I don't ski anymore. So it's not going to be me. So we have the group of us have talked together once in a while. A couple of things that I think are important about that. One of the things that I really like about what happened with the 17 people is we left Snowbird with the values, and then we worked on the principles after that online. And people for years have been trying to dig down as to what happened and say who was responsible for what, who wrote the values, who came up with Agile. And the response to that is, it doesn't matter. It was a collaborative effort of 17 people, and the output was the team's output, not any individual's output. And we have really stuck with that for 20 plus years and refused to answer that question. And I think that's the same kind of thing that collaborative teams ought to be thinking about. It's not individuals and what they've done, it's the team. Because in a collaborative environment, somebody will have an idea, somebody will take a rip off of that idea, and a new, better idea sort of evolves. So I don't know what we talk about.
Yeah, I've certainly heard Alistair say something similar a number of times. So he's often said similar things about, look, it was a collective effort, and yeah, there's a real desire not to attach certain aspects of what was produced, whether it be the values or the principles.
I think one of the things we talk about is the state of Agile today. And I think some of the group have sort of abandoned the field.
Hmm.
They're distressed at what has happened, and they're not going to try to fix it. I think there's another group that includes people like Alistair and John Kern and myself and a couple of others who still think there's a tremendous value in Agile. It's been shown to have that tremendous value for 20-some years. There's a lot of people using it all over the world. Let's see what we can do to kind of rejuvenate, reimagine what Agile is all about rather than throwing it away. And so I think that's something that we would talk about.
Great. That sounds great. And there are a number of us who, continuing on what the great work that you all did, and I guess feeling the same way. Sometimes you see a lot of articles online saying, Agile's dead. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. There's a great follow-up question here, which I think you might have touched upon, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts. So June Long's asking why the Agile Manifesto hasn't been sort of redefined since 2001, and I think a few people like this question and are curious about it. And there are lots of reasons that many of us have read and heard. I think we should be quite interested in hearing what your reasons might be around that. What are your perspectives on why it was written then in 20 years?
If you think back to the one chart I had that showed the number of light methodologists in 2001 as a dot, and then the Agile community today. So when we started thinking about this Reimagine Agile initiative, we said, well, let's reconvene a meeting. Who would you invite today? And my contention is that you could find 100 people instead of 17, and you still wouldn't have a really good grasp on the whole community. So what I think is a better idea than rewriting the manifesto or updating the manifesto is to extend the core Agile values into another area and write a set of guidelines or values or principles for that area. So for example, we did that in the project management area back in 2005 when we organized the Agile Project Leadership Network. Our value statements look different than what was in the manifesto, but you could derive those from what was in the manifesto. And I think you've got a number of different organizations that are doing that now. I mean, if you look at the basic fundamental principles or values of SAFe or Scrum, they can all be derived from the core Agile values. So that's something we may not want to throw away, but then you want to extend it and say, okay, maybe there's a product management group that wants to have a product management manifesto that is Agile-like. That'd be great. And so I think rather than try to do one document fits all or one thing fits all, you break it up into separate pieces. So what this Reimagined Agile group has said is we want it to be distributed. It's not about writing a new document. It's about getting a lot of people involved and having them write about how they are using Agile today. There's some really great stuff going on by a number of people in the Agile community today, and I think that will continue, and I think we want to support that and use this reimagining idea to sort of kickstart a new wave of Agile.
That's it. John, you've had your hand up for a while, patiently waiting. I'm going to invite you in to ask Jim your question.
Thanks. It's great to talk to Jim, and shout out to Sanjeev and Bob Payne and you at Lightspeed with one of your slides there. I just following on talking about who would you invite to Snowbird today. I was wondering about the original group. It seems to me there were people like now on Zoom meetings. We often invite people and we only get about a 40 or 50% show up rate of the people that you who say they're coming versus the people who actually show up. And I was wondering, was there people back then that wanted to come, but for some reason didn't come? I'm thinking about people like Mike Cohn, Scott Ambler, Mark Lyons, those kind of people that, and maybe I was looking for some others of that. And, Dave Thomas says one of our problems, we were all mogs, right? Middle-aged white guys. And we didn't have a lot of diversity other than American white males. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that from those days to today. And it's an honor to talk to you, by the way.
Yeah, that was those days, and and I think we all would agree that if we had to redo it today, we'd do it with a lot more diversity. And there were people who were invited who couldn't come, and there were people invited. And the one case that I remember is Grady Booch, was working for Rational at the time, and his basic thing was, well, that's probably never going to amount to anything. So there were people that were skeptical, and there were people that couldn't come, and there were people that didn't get invited because nobody knew them. And so, we tried to reach out and to get a variety of people. We didn't get nearly enough variety, and I don't think that would work again. I mean, we sort of kicked off some initiative this summer, and everybody got together on an email thread. And I don't think we'd ever agree on anything again.
Thanks so much.
I do have a question here that I see that I would like to answer. Do you believe as many management layers in the organization in the future as we see today? That is a great question, and I'll give you an answer. I have been doing a series of articles, and these are in-depth articles. The one I'm working on right now is about 10,000 words. And what I'm doing is there's been a number of people in the Agile community that are doing things like business agility and enterprise agility, who are trying to get across to upper management what agility is all about. And I decided to turn that around and find people in the executive ranks who I thought were Agile individuals and get them to tell us what they were doing. And so I've got an article that's be coming out in about a month on a guy who was a CIO at 3 different large organizations, one being a 25,000 person IT organization, where he implemented Agile from the CIO position. And one of the things that he did is take out about 2/3 of the layers of middle management, and then retrain the existing managers, the leaders that he left in what it was like to be an Agile manager. So, and the other thing he did, this will is he eliminated PMOs, strategy groups, architecture groups. Now he realized that he cut too hard into the architecture groups after a while, but he said, look, I want the teams and he used a Spotify model. I want the squads that are actually delivering the work. I want them to be responsible for architecture, for the project, for the results. And the more coordinators you got, the worse off you are. So one of the other guys that I've talked to recently, he was in an organization helping them through an Agile transformation, and it was a small organization. It had about 100 developers in it. And so he asked me the question, how many non-developers, project managers, scrum masters, those kinds of things, how many of those did you have? And I said, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 15. He said 98. So he had 100 developers and 98 managers of those 100. And that works out to something that he came up with, which is a bureaucracy mass index. And that's a bureaucracy mass index of about 50. and you need to get it below 15. And so that would mean cutting out, that would mean going from 98 managers, project managers, scrum masters, whatever, to 7. So there's a real place and a need for the middle management group, but we've got to be careful of that. The more management groups levels you have, the more chance there is for misalignment in a whole lot of different areas. And so this CIO that I'm talking about basically blew out his organizations. He went into another organization, which I write about, worldwide organization that had 50 plus executives and managers. And through a process of elimination, they cut that in half. So here's an exec that focuses on the top and the bottom and sort of realigns the middle. And so that's the kind of leader you need. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to really write about him, because to me, he epitomizes what an outstanding Agile leader is all about.
That's great. We need some more of that, that's for sure. Reduce the hierarchies. There's a question earlier on from Johnny via Vinny around UX. It's quite a long question. So what do you think about advances in UX research, meaning that it's possible to rely more on upfront design, and that he's heard that some in the UX world community aren't really interested in using Agile approaches to figure out how to build, what to build, as they do that with their research. Any thoughts and views on that?
I don't know enough about that area to give a thoughtful response. I'll just say the basic Agile values are about collaboration, about iteration and altering things as we go along, as technical excellence in getting the product out. And so if you look at those core Agile values and reduce them to their core, and in what environments are they not applicable? And it may not be all of them is applicable. It may be. So here's a situation where I would say the mindset is applicable. Whether there's a methodology that's applicable, I don't know. And maybe you have to come up with a new methodology for UX and X design based on those principles for the mindset.
So I've got one you've maybe had to answer before, and I know a number of folk get asked this, and I've heard Dave Snowden talk about this sort of thing. So it's from Geelong again. So it's you talked earlier about methods, methodologies, etc. And you mentioned Scrum as one of the methodologies. But a lot of us in the community have heard Scrum.org and others refer to it as a lightweight framework. Can you explain your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think you can implement Scrum in a way that will greatly enhance your development and delivery efforts. And I think you can implement Scrum in a way that doesn't. And so, again, I would go back to the idea of a prescriptive methodology versus an adaptive methodology. So it's interesting that some organizations use prescriptive Agile methods to build flexible products. In other words, they use the iterations to change and update their products. So they have an adaptive product development with what they think is a prescriptive methodology. It doesn't track. So I think the key point there is not necessarily the methodology or the framework, although some frameworks and the way they are implemented obviously are an issue. But I think it has to do with the mindset. And so I'll get back to that. And the mindset is something that's, we think it's easy, but it's really not. Particularly if you have parts of an organization that have a fixed mindset in Dweck's terminology rather than a growth mindset, and you run up against that all the time. And the other thing is that sometimes we get frustrated because the project manager won't do something, or the middle manager won't do something, or the executive won't do something that we think is the way to go. One of the things I found is that there are barriers to change all the way up to the board level. And there are situations where I've worked with CEOs who couldn't do some things because they couldn't get it past the board, because the board was very fixed oriented. And so you always are running into troubles like that. That's why I say agility is a journey, not a destination, because you're on this journey, you're going to run into problems here and there, and you're going to have to figure out how to get around those.
I think the problem a lot of us have, just listening to you there, is I think a lot of business leaders don't like phrases like that. Like something is a journey, and sort of cliched phrases that I think come up quite a lot. I think that's probably part of the challenge that a lot of us face when we try to help business leaders understand that these things are a progressive thing, and you won't see, success overnight. Because a lot of them are just driving towards, business outcomes as quickly as they can, kind of thing. So I think that's sometimes the challenge. I don't see any more questions in the chat at the moment.
Well, it was interesting. There's one about training for managers. The CIO that I've talked about, that I'm going to write about, he believes that you have the same leadership training for every level of the organization, that there's not some special executive training. And for example, he brings in training programs for all the Agile practices, and he insists that everybody in the company go through one-day overview of Agile. Everybody, all the new employees, all the way up to the CEO level. And he backs up his transformation teams with those kinds of things. So he really focuses on training, and particularly training at the team level, in terms of technical training, collaborative, project management training, those kinds of things. John, does the NC after your name indicate North Carolina?
Yes, sir.
I was born in North Carolina.
I'm here in Research Triangle, working for IBM's right up the road, so it's great to talk to a fellow North Carolinian, sir.
Yeah, I went to school at NC State. That's where I got my engineering degree. So a little side chatter there that nobody else is interested in.
We love that sort of thing here. We absolutely love that. I did see your comment, John, about I think somebody was talking about AI and ChatGPT, and you swooped in with your Watson versus ChatGPT, which I did quite enjoy. So thank you for that contribution. Graham, you've got your hand up there. Would you like to ask Jim a question?
Thanks, Seth, and thanks for hosting. And Jim, thanks for coming to speak to us this evening. Really great to hear your words. Couple of questions, if I may. Do you think there's any sort of correlation between the sort of negative sentiment at the moment around Agile and what's happening economically across the globe, and to what extent you think those two things are possibly related as budgets get squeezed and whatnot? And then I think maybe thinking to the future, do you have any sense, if you were to sort of fast forward 5 years from now, do you have any sense of what the Agile or agility landscape might look like 5 years from now?
On the second one, I don't. That's what I've decided to do, is give up trying to predict where things are going. I do think the conditions in the wide world have a big impact on us all. I mean, for example, the economic impact. I think the economic impact of the pandemic is still working itself through the economic system. So, for example, in the U.S., you got a lot of stimulus from early on in the Biden administration. Some of that is just taking hold now. Some of the inflation worldwide was caused by the pandemic, and I think we're lucky it didn't get any worse than it did. And I think it's disrupted a lot of businesses. So I think those kinds of things going on in the world do impact information technology and software development, things like budgets, and hopefully it'll make us smarter about doing things.
Great stuff. Good thoughts there. Thanks, Jim. Nothing else in the chat, just everyone contributing and augmenting other people's thoughts and comments. Oh, here's one now. And then, here we go. Sheila's question. I think it's a question. In the early days of your career, wasn't there a need for people to know certain things technically, as well as have a certain mindset and methodology? Are we really talking about going full circle? Okay. Perhaps we are. I'll let Jim answer that. Did you get that, Jim? Do you want me to read it out again?
We're talking about going through a full circle. I hope we're not going in circles. One of the things I used to say about Agile is that you can get into trouble with Agile as the difference between iteration and oscillation. And if you just find yourself going in circles, that's oscillation, and that can be caused by several different things: not having a good goal, not having, a good collaborative environment, a number of different things, and so I think those things do happen. And again, I forget where. Anyway, I've lost my train of thought.
I think you made the key point about not really going around in circles, and I think sadly, in some of the environments some of us are in, that's probably what's happening. I've got a quick one for you while we wait for any other questions in the chat or any hands to go up. In your, so you've had an extensive career journey. We've talked about it throughout the session. Any notable highlights, like something that you always find yourself coming back to as like a learning or something major that happened, was a real epiphany for you in any such sort of experience? There must be a few of those in there.
Well, if I look back over, let's just take my career. If I look back over my career of some 60 years in the business, I could never have predicted what happened to me, much less the technology. I mean, I made some real pivot points in my career where I took on some very adventurous decisions. I went from a big company to a startup, and that startup sort of launched the rest of my career. So I've got a couple of things there where I've done some major things, and they happened almost serendipitously. So, for example, in about 1996 or 7, there was an organization that several people I knew belonged to, the Cutter Consortium. And so I said, I would like to go to their conference, but I don't have enough money to go to their conference. So I called up Ed Jordan and I said, I'd like to come to your conference and I need to be on the program so I can afford to go. So he said, well, we don't have any speaker slots left, but you can come up and be on a panel. And so I went up and was on a panel, and I happened to sit beside the person who is the head of marketing, Ann Mulaney, who's been a friend forever after that. We just happened to sit beside each other at a dinner, and we got to talking about writing. And I was telling her about finishing up my first book, and she was telling me about a position that they had for a writer for a fairly comprehensive software development newsletter. And so that chance meeting produced a whole different aspect of my career. But the other thing was I was open to that kind of stuff because I wanted to do more writing. And so it was a combination of being at the right place in the right time and being open to some changes. And so one of the things I think is important, I didn't plan out a career. But one of the things that evolved over time was I had some purpose to my career. And I think those kinds of purposes are important, particularly in a very turbulent environment where you could lay out a career plan. I guarantee you it's not going to work like that, which is one of the things I'm trying to instill in my grandson, who's going to be off to college next year. And I'm trying to get him to think about how he goes about learning and how he goes about selecting things. So, for example, to be both technical and communicating, to understand communication as well as the technical. So that's one of the things that has held me in good stead over the years, is having the technical and management background, but also having the communications background.
absolutely sound advice. I'm sure he's grateful for it. Any other questions, folks? I see nothing in the chat. You're welcome to take your hand up or come off mute. We've still got 20 minutes, perhaps. If there are other questions. Oh, here's one now. Ish. What have we got? After the Agile Manifesto written. Oh, it's popped away on my screen there. Scrolling back to Ish, don't worry. After the Agile Manifesto written at world's first Agile meetup, how did you go about transforming your career workplace to be agile?
Well, by that time, I was pretty much an independent consultant. And so I was helping other organizations be more agile. And that was an interesting time period because I took the agile period and broke it into 3 different sub-periods. So the first sub-period was about 2001 to 2005, and I call it the rogue team era. And that's when we went into organizations and you'd have a team somewhere in that organization that wanted to go agile, but nobody else in the organization was interested. But they would get dispensation to do a project or maybe a couple of projects. And then the organizational antibodies would come out and attack so that it didn't go any further. And that was an interesting phenomenon to look at. I remember Josh Kirievsky talking about a project, the team that he worked with, and they were very successful doing this agile project. And they were working in a conference room where they had all the diagrams and everything, all the pieces of paper on the wall, their plans on the wall, and their cards on the wall. And they walked in one Monday morning and it was all gone. And somebody from one of the other teams who was jealous of this team for being successful had come in and taken everything down. So the early years were full of interesting stories like that.
Absolutely. That's why we're thrilled to have you here today to share some of them. John, you've got your hand up. You've got a question for Jim.
Morning, everybody. I just got back from the gym. It's 7 o'clock in the morning here in Australia. Jim, nice to hear your thing. Longevity in the industry, and we're very similar, 61 years. I've just been reading a book called Scrum for Hardware about using extreme manufacturing and building a car called WikiSpeed quite a few years ago, where they adopted the Scrum values and whatever to actually building a modular car. So what you're saying is quite correct. They actually use the values and were able to adapt it in an engineering sense as well. So I'm just reading the book. It's by an Italian. I recommend it for those who want to see how Scrum is applied in non-software areas. Any comments?
One of the projects that I talk about in my book was a hardware-software project for a medical instrument company up in Canada. And we had a combined team of electrical engineers, product engineers, systems engineers, a couple of scientists, and a software engineers, and they worked together as a co-located team to work on this medical instrument. Because what they found was that, yeah, you had the hardware, but if you didn't have good software to go with it, it was useless. So that was a project that we did back in like 2005. And so there are definitely people who have used the philosophies and the values to do hardware projects. But there's a difference, as we learned, because, for example, you got long delay times in hardware development or getting parts in. And so we laid out a timeline up on the board. It was 3 years long, which is a little different than
I think the thing that came out of the book, Jim, was the fact that it wasn't a monolithic structure they had. They modularized the structure of this test car called WikiSpeed, so that multiple teams could work on multiple parts,
right,
and join them together at a scrums level even, and how they work together. And it was purely hardware.
Amazing. Thanks for that, John. So it was Scrum for Hardware, the book that you were recommending. I just popped it in the chat. I just want to make sure I got that right. Anyway, long time no see. Question here for Jim. What are your thoughts on how to do strategy in an agile way? Any thoughts on that, Jim?
I mean, it really depends on your approach to strategy and what you think strategy is. And so I think I seem to have a broken record when it comes to responses. Responses mindset. You have an agile mindset going into strategy sessions, and if you do, how does that change your strategy sessions? And at what level are you talking about? Are you talking about a senior executive level, or are you talking about a mid-management level? When you get to senior management levels, you know, you need to be thinking about things like beyond budgeting, because those are ways of changing the whole financial structure of an organization and how it approaches products and projects and initiatives. And that requires some major changes, but it supports a more agile environment. And so again, I think it's just the mindset you bring to this. You do some of the same things, you look at some of the same objectives, you just do it a little differently. So for example, in the book that I wrote a couple of years ago on digital transformations, actually I call it digital transitioning these days, we talk about building up what we call a lean value tree, which is goals, bets, and initiatives. And so the bets are, don't think about one way of delivering a goal, but think about 2 or 3 different ways, and then runs experiments to figure out which one is the best way. So that's an experiential and evolutionary approach to strategy, rather than a top-down, here are the goals, here are the objectives, here are the projects. And so again, it's how you take a look at strategy and how you take a look at business planning. And do you look at those things as fixed or variable, and how, if it's variable, how are you going to get to the right one through experimentation?
Great stuff. I missed a question from Tom, so I've scrolled back and found it. So Tom's asking, has Agile failed to teach us to define stakeholder values to evolve towards?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I was trying to read one of the other
No,
chat sessions. I should have.
No, it might just scrolling as well. So Tom's asking, has Agile failed to teach us to define stakeholder values to evolve towards? I'm not sure if that question needs clarification. If it does, Tom, you're welcome to unmute and
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah.
Hey,
Tom, do you want to help us understand what you're?
No, I think Jim said he got it, so that's fine, Jim. Did you say you understood the question? No, Jim.
No, I wasn't sure.
Okay. Did the Agile we know fail to help us define stakeholder values that we could evolve towards and iterate towards? Talk about values.
I think the evolution of looking at stakeholder value and customer value evolved out of the Agile principles and values, but it's not a direct correlation. I think that's something that we learned. And I mean, I started talking about value oriented project management with a book I wrote in 2009, and that sort of caught on. But I think it's a hard time kind of evaluating or trying to figure out what value is. But for example, you can do it fairly easily. I had a project team in London that I went to visit one time, and because I wanted to see how they were doing with their client. And so they talked about how they were working, and the client enjoyed, the client was satisfied, and it seemed like a pretty good project that was ongoing. And so then I asked them, I said, so what's the client complain about? And they said velocity. And I said, well, what do you report to them? And they said velocity. I said, try this. Try taking each one of your story cards and sitting down with your customer and ranking those story cards 1 to 5 stars, and each star is a value point, and report value points and story points. And I went back and talked to him a few months later, and I said, how's it doing? And they said, well, they're not asking about velocity anymore. And so I think something as simple as that can help people move from a output kind of thing to a value kind of thing. And I think that's something that people are still trying to do. It's hard because it's harder to define value than it is to define outputs. But I think you need, the better you get at that, the more valuable you're going to be to your customer.
Okay, so there's one here from Tiana. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Asking, what's it asking? As someone who has worked in a range of companies, from startups to large companies, I've seen a recurring argument across them of Agile versus Waterfall. But putting the labels of methodology aside, if you had to implement one meaningful change, stroke working practice to see the biggest impact, what would it be?
I think the thing that is the most difficult and has the biggest impact is matching the capabilities of your team to the problem. And so, for example, talking about waterfall versus Agile, the biggest problem with waterfall isn't the sequence of events. The biggest problem with waterfall is its impact on organization and collaboration, because what happens is the waterfall life cycle then becomes an organization. So you have an analysis group, a design group, and an architecture group, and a programming group, and a testing group. And then you have this assumption that the communication between those groups can be documentation. And that's what happened in the 80s and 90s. So what you had was you had separate groups that didn't talk to each other, that communicated via documentation. And so I wrote about this recently in the blog and LinkedIn, and I said, so if you have a project that's really certain and you don't need to do iterations, and I don't think there are many of those, but if you want to do a waterfall project, be sure you use a collaborative cross-functional team to get away from those problems that we had with waterfall methodologies back in the 90s. And so it's more than just the the life cycle. And so I think matching your capability to the problem is a big thing, because then what you do is you adjust your methodology based on that situation. And so, and I find that that's something that people have a hard time doing, is adjusting their methodology to fit the problem, as well as being realistic about their capabilities. I think we all have a tendency to overestimate our capability. And we've got to be careful of that, because it can lead us down a path to, to have projects and products fail, because we overestimate our capability and we overestimate the capability of the team. And I use the analogy of mountain climbing. I live outside of Denver, Colorado. I can go out here and climb 14,000 footer, and basically it's a walk up. I can do that, or I can't do it anymore, but I used to be able to do it. That's a whole lot different than climbing K2, which is the most dangerous mountain in the Himalayas. You have to have years of preparation and skill and technical ability to do that. I wouldn't even attempt that. But I know companies that have attempted projects that are so far beyond themselves like that they get themselves in big trouble. So that, to me, that's the biggest hurdle that really impacts working space that people could work on, matching capability to problem.
I'm just checking what other ones I missed. So there's been a lot of great sharing and interaction in the chat. folks. So if I missed your question, just ping me, draw my attention to it. It's there's a lot all happening all at the same time. There's one here, Jim, but we've got about 5 minutes or so, maybe time for another couple of questions. One generic one here from BG asking, what industry do you think would benefit from going agile? Anything that you've seen come up recently?
Well, agility is, again, you need to match agility to the industry you're in. The problem right now is that sometimes we don't know what industry we're in. So, for example, the hotel industry, did they see Airbnb coming? Nope. So you think you're in the hotel business, but the definition of what that means is changed because of startups and new ideas about how to do things. But in general, the more or the less turbulent your marketplace, the less you could deal with lower levels of agility. So, for example, not everybody needs to be as agile as Google. They just don't. They're in a different industry. So, for example, the automobile industry may not be as agile as Google. However, with the advent of electrical vehicles and other changes in the automobile industry, maybe they do need to be agile. It's a question of how agile. And so that's why that's why it's a journey, because you've got to, you maybe get to one level and find out, oops, that's not enough. I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, the CEO of Ford Motor Company was interviewed on a podcast, and he was talking about the issues related to software in their cars as compared to Tesla. And what Ford does, and some of the other big companies do, is they go out to various suppliers to get the lowest cost components, and they plug in these components. And so you got 150 components with 150 different software pieces of software, and they're a bear to integrate. Whereas so Ford goes about it is, I've got a car that's got components that happen to have software. Tesla goes about it from the standpoint of, I got a big piece of software here that's going to run a car. And so there's a completely integrated set of architected, well-developed software for Tesla. How's Ford ever going to get there? I mean, they need to get there, but it's going to be a real issue. So how agile do you need to be? That question is, or the answer to that question is changing all the time.
I guess it's, as we often say, context is everything. Sheila, you've got your hand up. I think you get the privilege of the final question, because I suspect after that we'll come up to time.
Well, we started with talking about a new movement to go back to basics and forward to the future. And I never heard any more about how you joined the movement.
Well, unfortunately, there's nothing to join right now. We've sort of made an announcement on LinkedIn and some other social platforms. There's a small group of people who sort of spearheading this, and we should come out with something new here in the next couple of weeks. But it's not going to develop a document. It's going to helpfully give people a way to or incentive to think about their own ways of reimagining Agile. So it's going to be very distributed. It's not going to be led from the middle or from the top, because there's not really a top or a middle. So people have asked I got 35,000 posts, hits on LinkedIn, and then about a couple of hundred comments, and about half those comments said we want to help, and hopefully we're going to come out with something that says here's how you can do it for yourselves. Here, keep asking yourself the question, what can I do for the industry? And somebody asked me about it the other day, somebody who's in the product management area, who's done a great job of integrating Agile ideas into product management. And I said, just keep doing what you're doing, because you're adding to you're adding to the idea about agility of product management, even though he's not, doesn't say the word agile very often. So I guess what I'd say is stay tuned, and we'll try to get more information out to the group. We're supposed to have another meeting in a couple of weeks. So there's really 4 people right now. And so one of the things we're doing is we're sort of inviting 1 or 2 other people in to get the group a little bit bigger and get some other ideas about it. But when we started thinking about having a big meeting, it sort of broke down when we started thinking about who would we invite and what would we want to try to do. And so I think we're going to try to leave it very informal now. But for example, one of the people sort of leading this effort is Heidi Busser, who's the board chair of the Agile Alliance. And so the Agile Alliance is going to have an initiative on reimagining Agile. Maybe one of the Scrum groups wants to do the same thing. Maybe the future of work group. Maybe you want to do something. Maybe you want to do a podcast, or maybe you want to do a put some things together on your own. So it really is it's an idea, and it's a distributed effort. It's not a centralized effort. About what I could tell you about it.
That's it. I've got a few minutes. I'm going to start bringing it to a close. You packed quite a lot into the last few minutes even, so I was going to ask you if you had any final thoughts or words of wisdom for the group, but you might have just preempted me there. But any,
I've just emptied my wisdom bucket.
Listen, I'll start bringing it to a close. I've got a few minutes. We like to finish on time. We stick to our time box. You'll be pleased to hear. I just wanted to say we're ever grateful for you joining us. Thank you for the session. It was wonderful to hear from you. I got a lot out of it. I'm sure everybody else did as well. We will share the recording. I'd actually invite you all just to, if you're happy to do so, just unmute and just let's give Jim a round of applause. It's been great to have him here, great to host him, and what a great end to 2023 programme for Future Work Scotland. So can I get a round of applause for me? So thank you for that.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks for your appreciation, folks. Absolutely wonderful to have Jim here to close the session. So thank you. We don't really have any final kind of announcements because we've come to the end of the year. Just to I guess just to give you a little bit of insight, Donald, Paula, and I, we're starting to build the program for 2024. It's coming together nicely. We're very excited by some of the things we've got in the pipeline. Look out for that. Things will start to sort of appear on meetups. So we're not that far away from starting to announce some of the sessions. So look out for those. Yeah, I think it's nothing else remains to be said other than thank you all for joining us this evening. Well, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be. We've got people from all corners of the globe. For your participation and your support throughout the year. We wouldn't be able to do this without your support and your encouragement and your enthusiasm and everything you all bring to the group. So we're grateful for you all. And we look forward to, sharing more great sessions next year and seeing you in the new year. So, we're going into the festive period. So hope everybody stays safe. Have a great time. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Have a great festive period.
Give us a carol.
I'm not going to do that, Vinny. It's too early for that. A week's away. I've not even got my Christmas jumper on yet. I've got my Christmas social tomorrow, though, for work. So that'll be me right in the swing of it. But thanks, everyone. It's been great to see you all. Stay safe. Have a brilliant festive period. And we'll see you all in the new year. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you have to be. Thanks again, everybody. It's been brilliant to see you. Thanks for your support.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Seth.
Bye.